Welcome back to For the Elevate. For those of you who've been tuning in, this is our 9th episode. We hope you're enjoying our conversations because we are having a super time sharing our insights and our tips with you. And just maybe those tips are inspiring you to make some changes in both your personal and your professional lives, because we certainly hope so. Our last conversation was centered around collaboration. So we thought the best follow-on to that would be a focus on 2 key attributes, or as we like to say, 2 sides of the leadership coin, which is grit and grace. Both so fundamental to our journey as women and also important as leaders for our investment in others. In this episode, we will define grit and grace for you. We'll provide a few examples, and we'll even discuss some ways you can get your own grit and grace on as you keep it real, at home and at work. We'll also add just a little bit of perspective around emotional intelligence, as you can't lead with grit and grace and not be self-aware. And just a reminder, thinking about ourselves is not the same as knowing ourselves. Leana will lead us on this journey of knowing and honoring ourselves on this path to thriving.
We're back. Hi, girls. We're back. Good. We're back for the Elevate, living, leading, and learning. That's which one's which. So we're going to talk today about, I think it's actually a really good name for a sitcom, but grit and grace.
Love it.
Yeah. So grit and grace in leadership. Thoughts on grit and grace? Can you define them for us?
Well, both important. That's what's really important to understand. There are 2 sides of the leadership coin, and you really are not going to be successful without both. And, grit is that sort of tenacity, determination to overcome the obstacles, stay on course, and get results. And grace is really focusing on the relationships and getting the talent to the table in a way where people want to contribute and be a part of the team. That's critical.
Yeah, and I think when you have both those things and they work in tandem, it's great. But sometimes, situations call, just for grit, and sometimes they call just for grace. But when they can both come together, and quite often these days, you need a little bit of both in order to help your teams move forward, to help yourself move forward. It's really important. And, especially with grace, I always find it interesting because I've often heard women especially say, grace sometimes means I just have to roll over, I just have to give them their way. And I'm like, that, no, it doesn't mean that. No. Not at all. So it really means being, thoughtful, having the discussion. But, you can lead in that discussion with kindness. It doesn't mean that you have to, take their opinion and go their way and just roll over. So I think we just need to be mindful of some of those things.
Kindness and decorum.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And what happens if you got too much of one or the other, or you stay on one side of that coin and don't go to the other?
Well, I think we've all worked with people where we can say, that's grit. And that's grace. And there's a downside, obviously, to both of those things. And as women, so often, and I remember my earlier career, I was the only female on the executive team, and it was I had to figure that out because I was kind of a tough guy to start with, but I was also a female and wanted to not behave in ways that were alienating people. So, where is that line? And how do I demonstrate? What I wanted was the respect and the caring for individuals as well. And you got to figure your own way, but watch for both of those things.
Right.
Yeah, I think, I was recently speaking with a female leader, and she was telling me that she always feels that she always has to be the strong one. She has to exhibit this grit all the time. But when she would get behind her, in her office, close that door, she would just break down. And I said, well, how unhealthy is that? And she's like, it may be unhealthy, but it's the only way I know to lead. It's what I've been taught. It's what, I don't know any other way. So we started having a conversation of how she could implement and put some of that grace in there. Definitely not comfortable doing it, something that she was going to have to practice. But the fact that you close a door, you break down because you just can't go another moment. I mean, that's really tough. And I think there's a lot of women out there doing the exact same thing.
Oh, sure there are. Yeah, absolutely. We see it all the time, I think. You don't have to behave like you're somebody else in order to get the results that you need. Right. Don't you think? Authenticity throughout this, but also being aware when to bring either one of those in. If you're someone who leans heavily on grace, where do you learn a comfortable level of grit? If you don't have
that's a good question, because often you'll see that person who's kind and caring and all of that, but they're not getting results. Absolutely not okay. So your job as a leader is to get results. And so you've got to be able to speak up and be clear about expectations and what you need from people. And that's actually respectful. They don't need to be wondering what you're thinking. So be clear. This is what I need from you. Here's a timeline. They don't hit a timeline. It's fine to say, you missed the deadline. What's going on? And maybe there's a great reason. Ask the question. But having grace doesn't mean you're letting things slide. It means you're being respectful in your interactions with people, and that you value them.
Yeah, and I think, as leaders, you are an influencer. And when you exhibit too much of kindness and you never go and try to influence that situation to make a better path for someone, to make changes in an organization because you don't want to create waves, that's not the right level of kindness. And leaders do prepare the way for others to be successful, and that's how they can do that.
I think I just heard some grit in the background there a minute ago.
That was my grit over there.
It sounds like having a balance between grit and grace requires some real emotional intelligence.
It really does, because you have to be able to read yourself. How am I coming across, and manage your own emotions. And that's not always easy, regulating yourself. And then you also have to have those social skills where you're actually able to read the room and you're managing the emotions and the interactions in the room. And it's an important skill set that can be learned, and it's way harder for some than others, but it actually can be learned. And if you find it hard, get a coach.
Yeah, I happened to be in a meeting one time, and I thought this was fantastic. A new leader had come in. She was relatively new, and she led the meeting, a lot of conversation, some good, some bad. And then when it was over, she said, before you leave, I want to understand how I did. So can you give me some feedback? And she said, I'm just going to call on you, just be honest, open feedback. And first people were like, you're kidding me, right? I mean, I'm not going to tell you. And she said, no, I really want that. And so people started, it was a little bit, and then a little bit, and then it was a lot. And by the time she left and they left, they were energized. They loved that she asked for their opinion. And she said, I really need to know this about myself. She said, this is my coaching, opportunity for myself, and you're really helping me. So, and it wasn't taken away as, we're not the leaders. We're not going to do your job. It was, how can I do this better? How can I make sure you're understanding what I need from you? And I thought that was great.
It is great. It is great. I think people sometimes they get into leadership positions, even if it's their first one, and they feel like, okay, I've got to now be this person.
Right.
And authenticity is always going to win. I recently had someone come to me with this dilemma, and I'm sure you've had the same thing, where they had someone on their team who has great aspirations of moving forward and does not have that social piece. I guess it would be the social piece where the people part is just missing. A lot of grit, but also, so I guess it's self-awareness, because even though things are being pointed out that this is an area where they need to improve and work on coaching, they literally don't see it. Like they just don't see it. So there's zero self-awareness on that level. Any thoughts on how to move forward with someone like that?
Well, first, having the conversation about leadership is about managing human beings. It's about influencing people in ways that make them want to move forward. And it's okay to talk about their behaviors. When you do this, this is the outcome. This is how people feel. And those aren't the results you're going for. So I think having frank conversations like that, not attacking their character,
right,
but talking about their behaviors and how they impact other people, can really open people's eyes and get their attention. And then say, if you want to be a leader, this is an area you really need to focus on.
And I think it's also good to ask a friend who is close enough to you at work, someone, a colleague that you trust their opinion, and you can go to them and say, how am I coming across? I mean, you've seen me in meetings, you've seen me interact one-on-one. How am I doing? But when you ask that question, you have to be willing to hear the answer, right? And I have always appreciated that, but that's so important to be able to stop and say, on this path to leadership, I know I've got some weaknesses and, I need to improve. Let me go out and find some people to either validate or, tell me just exactly how I'm being perceived. It really is very helpful.
Absolutely.
Which is great, but that requires a little bit of emotional intelligence to start with. Yeah, some people need the direct listen.
And again, this applies at every level. I mean, if your CEO is someone who has a balance between those two things, that's going to create a culture around that piece. But really, leadership, regardless of whether or not you have people who report to you, it doesn't matter, because leadership is really about influencing other people. Right. So, it can go this way, it can go this way, it can go this way with grit and grace. I think it's applicable in all directions.
Yeah. Right. And for those of us in healthcare, I mean, you talk about the good physician. What's a good physician look like, or a good nurse? Leana and I are nurses. So I always say it's not just that technical competence. You could have the best technical skills in the world, but if you can't empathize with your patient or read that they're grieving or in pain or anything else, you're not going to be the best you can be. It's the same thing with leadership. It's all about being human and delivering what people need and creating the conditions so they can hear you and participate and get on board.
Yeah.
Mic drop.
Mic drop. There you go. Right. That's it. That's perfect. So we're going to write the, what do you call it? I was going to say screenplay, but we're going to write the pilot for the series, Grit and Grace. And so, watch your local listings.
Awesome.
All right. Grit and Grace for the Elevate. We'll see you next time.
The Elevate.
So Leana may be onto something here. So stay tuned for that Grit and Grace sitcom somewhere down the road. But in all seriousness, we are hoping that you walk away today knowing a little more about yourself and how Grit and Grace can be that perfect addition to your investment portfolio. Now on to one of our favorite moments when we get to end our chats with a funny quote to think about when those days get just a little bit too heavy. And hey, you might even be having one of those kind of days today. So if you've been listening, you know we refer to these quotes as titter times. So here's a fun one. And this one we like, well, just because. So here we go. My favorite exercise is a cross between a lunge and a crunch. I call it lunch. So we aren't sure who said this, and quite frankly, maybe that's a good thing, but we hope it made you laugh, at least just a little bit. So to complete this episode, please don't forget to leave us comments. Let us know what side of that leadership coin you represent most. What will you do differently to find that balance? And keep in mind the respect you show for others, the grace, as well as your ability to get that job done, the grit, is so critical to your success, your reputation, and let's not forget your personal brand. We're here to help, so don't hesitate to reach out as you get your grit and grace on. Until next time, keep moving towards that healthier you. Do it for the Elevate.